The wait is over. Samsung's Galaxy S9 and S9 Plus are finally here. We just got to spend a little bit of hands-on time with them, and they're basically what we expected. That is to say, devices that look very similar to the ones they're replacing, but pack some really impressive internal upgrades. Let's take a closer look. First, I have to say I'm sorry to anyone who is looking for a dramatic Samsung redesign here. The S9 looks really familiar, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think the S8 and the S8 Plus were two of the best looking and best constructed devices Samsung has ever made, and I'm glad that commitment to quality still exists here. There are some differences though. The bezels around the screens are a little bit smaller, so it does feel a little bit more comfortable in your hands, and this is the first time you're going to get stereo speakers in a Samsung Galaxy phone. They're not ideal though. One points directly at you through the earpiece, and the other one fires downward through the bottom of the device. It's not perfect, but it does sound pretty good. The fingerprint sensor has moved as well, thankfully. On the S8 and the S8 Plus, if you reached over to unlock your phone, there was a decent chance you'd smudge your camera lens. Not so this time, because the fingerprint sensor finally sits below the camera. And as you'd expect from two devices that are completely different sizes, they have different sized batteries too. This is pretty much the same story as with the S8 and the S8 Plus. The smaller S9 has a 3000 mAh battery, and the S9 Plus has a 3500 mAh battery. This year, though, the experience you're going to get with the S9 Plus is pretty different than the one you're going to see with the standard S9. That's partially because of what's inside the phones. At the base level, both devices have 64 gigabytes of storage, and in the US they're going to use Qualcomm's Snapdragon 845 chipset, just like we expected. The difference is that smaller device has 4 gigabytes of RAM compared to the 6 you're getting in the bigger S9 Plus. In our limited time with these devices, this hasn't made the biggest difference. Both devices are incredibly fast, whether you're playing with some of the new AR-powered features in Bixby, or just sort of thumbing through websites and firing up normal apps. It's incredibly quick, and I hope this is the same kind of performance we'll see out of every other Snapdragon 845 phone we see at the show this year. Really though, the big draw of the Galaxy S9 is its camera, or cameras, depending on which model you go for. The standard S9 has what Samsung calls its 12-megapixel super speed dual-pixel camera. That's because the memory is built directly into the sensor, so there's much faster throughput from the sensor into where it's processed. That same camera is available on the S9 Plus, but it's also paired with another 12-megapixel camera for telephoto shots, so you get that 2x optical zoom. As it turns out, if you're looking for performance out of your Samsung device this year, there are clear benefits to going for that bigger smartphone. Regardless, no matter which S9 you go for, this super speed camera is actually really impressive for a few reasons. First, it uses a variable aperture. Unlike other smartphones with fixed apertures, you can bounce between f1.5 and f2.4 on the Galaxy S9's main camera, and that allows you to more directly control the amount of light actually striking the sensor, and that's pretty huge. Shooting in f1.5 is great in low-light situations and when you want really tight close-ups with a lot of bokeh and detail. That f2.4, meanwhile, feels a bit more like a catch-all. You're probably going to be shooting with this most of the time and just gives you a flatter, more even composition throughout. If you're using the Pro mode, you can manually switch between both of these apertures, and there isn't always a huge difference, but it is there, and if you're shooting in the right circumstances, the effect can be incredible. To really get a feel for how this camera works in different conditions, Samsung set up a box that was incredibly dark with an image right at the bottom. The S8 that we had on hand did a decent job, but the S9 absolutely blew it away. It didn't look exactly as though it were taken in daylight, but it was pretty close. We're going to need to spend a little more time with these cameras before we're able to pass a final verdict, but I can safely say, just based off of the photo quality we've seen in our limited hands-on time, there's going to be a lot to like about this thing. This time around, these cameras can also shoot slow-motion video at up to 960 frames per second, a feat that we'd only seen on Sony smartphones before. There are two ways to do this. You can either set it to auto, where motion within a certain space triggers the recording, or manual, where you just take full control yourself, and that's actually what we'd recommend. Leaving it in auto didn't always work the way we wanted it to, and while I got some really cool slow-motion shots of me being a dork with a fidget spinner and a deck of cards, we really had to go to manual to make sure the fun stuff was captured correctly. There is one more camera trick you should know about, and it's honestly kind of wild. You might have heard that Samsung was working on its own approach to the Animoji, and it has. Instead of taking your facial features and applying them to a poop or a unicorn, Samsung is now allowing you with the S9 to create Animojis of your own face, which is kind of insane. I spent a little too much time doing this at the briefing than I care to admit because the effect was so striking and it looked honestly so much like me that the gifts that you could send to people via messages after you created your AR emoji were a little disturbing. You're also going to use that camera a lot for the updated Bixby experience, which does seem quite a bit more polished than the version we got on the S8 and the S8 Plus last year. For one, it's got a new look, which makes it much easier to swipe between the different Bixby modes you want to work with, and there are a few new ones here to play with as well. Back at CES, we caught our first glimpse of what Samsung calls its food mode, allowing you to point Bixby at a piece of food and have it give you a rough calorie count that you can later add to your S Health profile. This does work a little better now. It really nicely identified a bagel, but kind of faltered on some granola that was on top of some sort of yogurt parfait thing that I didn't eat. Also new are live translations, which are basically exactly what you'd expect. If you're traveling in a foreign land, like we are here in Spain for instance, you could point the Galaxy S9 and Bixby at a sign or a menu and get very quick and surprisingly accurate translations right there in front of you. It doesn't even have to be a printed sign. My colleague wrote stuff in Chinese that Bixby was able to decipher with basically no problem, and with some spotty network issues too. Right at Bixby's beginning, you could use it to scan things like wine and get more detailed information about the bottle you're looking at. But now you can use that to shop for things, to an extent. We pointed the Galaxy S9 and Bixby at some shoes and a watch and a couch, and while it always identified generally what we were looking at, it couldn't actually identify what the make or model of these things were. So using this thing as a tool to identify stuff that you want to own is only half functional for now. And then there's makeup, which is obviously more important to some of our audience than others. Once you have Bixby pointed at you, you can apply augmented reality makeup directly to your face in case you wanted to see what you look like with fake lashes or lipstick. The effect worked shockingly well, and integrations with CoverGirl and Sephora make it relatively easy to then go through and buy the things that you liked on your face. So yeah, the S9 might feel a little iterative sometimes, but all of the work Samsung put into its camera doesn't just affect the quality of the pictures you're taking. It kind of makes the entire Galaxy S9 experience richer as a result. We're going to have to spend a little bit more time with these devices to really get a feel for them, so stay tuned for a whole lot more from MWC 2018.